All right, welcome to this month's episode of Mixed Extent, episode 2, where we're going to discuss indexing and statistic maintenance. I'm Anthony Innocentino with my co-hosts, Anthony Prusky and Mark Wilkinson. We have two very special guests today, Erik Darling and Erin Stellato. Erik started using SQL Server in 2008 after a dispute with Excel over a VLOOKUP. I feel you, brother. And enjoys public arguments with the optimizer and wine photography. So just looking at it, we're drinking it.
No, I take a picture of it when the glass is like on the way to my mouth, and then hopefully I catch like the essence of the wine, and then it's gone.
Understood. And we also have Erin Stellato. Erin is a data platform MVP, lives outside of Cleveland, Ohio, and has over 20 years of technology experience and has worked with SQL Server since 2003. Her areas of interest include performance tuning, extended events, query store, and helping the accidental or involuntary DBA figure out how SQL Server works. And so thank you both for being here today. And I'm going to go ahead and kick it off with
I want to butt in. I'm going to get you both back for these intros. It's my turn to do the next. It's going to get
next. All right, so
I'm going to get introduced to my next speaking session as Anthony Prusky. I can see it coming.
Okay, we can edit this in. Andrew Prusky.
Perfect.
All right, so let's get started. Our very first question. So Erik, back in April, you put a tweet out that said, back in before time.
Okay.
It was only 2 weeks ago.
Yeah.
You put a tweet out that said, please don't waste your time with index maintenance. Updating stats is just fine. And yes, that's your quote, but we're going to kick off the first question with Erin. How do you feel about seeing like when someone makes a statement like that and with your experiences about indexing and statistics? Is that kind of the standard practice that we're seeing today?
I don't see that as standard practice in the people that I'm talking to, but I don't talk to everybody, so I don't know. I think that there's a lot more that Erik probably has behind that, but maybe not. I think that it's in SQL Server, right? We talk about all the time how it depends, and there are cases where I think that's absolutely valid, and there are cases where it probably isn't.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. So like when I talk about stuff like that, you know, a lot of the issue that I have with people doing that sort of cargo culty type of index maintenance is that they just give it way too much credence for the problems that it solves. A lot of the times the problem that they run into is that they just had weirdly out of date stats, and a stats update can do the job of an index rebuild without like a lot of the additional work that goes into it. I mean, you have some of the additional work that goes into it, not all of it. And I think the real problem is that, on top of people sort of elevating the index rebuild above all else, is that they kind of start doing that stuff to the exclusion of real meaningful index tuning. Like, I'm sure Erin runs into it too, where like, you're on the phone with the client for the first time and you're kind of like trying to get a feel for them. And you're like, hey, so who's responsible for tuning the indexes around here? And someone's just like, oh yeah, we have a script that rebuilds them every night. And you're like, not what I meant, but thanks for letting me know. So, there's, and yeah, I absolutely see that. Like, I absolutely see the value in it. I don't think that rebuilds exist for no reason. No, actually, everything is there for at least a pretty good reason. After all, SQL Server has Mars in it, so there's room for everything, and there's certainly room and time to do the index rebuilds. But I think, I don't know, maybe Erin would agree that there are more important maintenance tasks out there, like backups and CheckDB, that I'd rather see people doing than that.
That's funny that you say that, because we just finished teaching IE0, which is our immersion event for accidental involuntary DBAs. And I cover maintenance. And one of the first things we talk about is backups. And they're probably so sick at the end of the week of hearing me talk about how important backups are. Sure. And my argument is that after that, CheckDB is most important, because both of those you can't catch up, right? Like if you are in a problem and you need a backup, you can't just take one and then you're good to go. Like you're hosed by that point. With index and stats maintenance, if you're in a problem and you need them, it's like, oh, I can run these now and, potentially address my problem. So I definitely agree that backups, the most important thing, integrity checks next, and then stats and index maintenance. The thing that I think, the reason I would suspect that a lot of people just set them up and run them and think that takes care of everything is because there's so much to do, right? There's so
Sure.
much to do in terms of managing your indexes and keeping them lean and effective. And there's so many options you have for how you can manage both your indexes and your stats. And I would rather somebody have that sledgehammer approach than do nothing. So I think that because, right, the goal is at least do something, please do something. And so
Sure.
everybody's just like, well, that's all I need to do. And that's just step one, right? In like a step of 10,000 or whatever.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's just so many crazy things to consider aside from just like, is the index fragmented or not? It's like, how is it fragmented? Then like, what version of SQL you're on? Can I do the rebuild online? And it's just like, you're right. It's far too confusing. I think, especially for like I love the way you say involuntary DBA, because that's, I think, how everyone,
the person who's next to the server and they're like, you're it.
That's such a great way to phrase it. But yeah, it's just like there's so much to think about that. Like I totally get why someone just does whatever and thinks it's fine, whether it's Ola, whether it's maintenance plan, whether they, I don't know, go find like Michelle Ufford's script from 2011 or something. And it's like, whatever it is, like, yeah, sure. Like you're happy to see them like, take that sort of interest in there, because like, imagine like, you walk onto a server and the whole problem was just that stats were kind of out of date. And you're like, oh, that's such a easy fix. And we have all this other time.
So in that though, then, what is an out of date statistic? Like, what does that really mean? Like when you guys walk up, you said you walk up to a server and like, what's the red flag that you see that's like, oh, I need to do these things to fix the stats to make, queries better?
Well, I mean, like thinking about stuff that Erin has blogged about with the ascending key trace flags and all that other stuff. In older versions of SQL Server, that was one of the first like big like out of date stats problems that I would see with query plans, because you would get that crappy one row guess for anything that was off the histogram, and I can't tell you how many days that ruined. That was bad. That was not a good time.
I have. In the beginning, when I first started working with SQL Server, I always went by last updated, right? DBCC show stats, my favorite DBCC command. Let me see when they were last updated. And, oh, they haven't been updated in a month. We need to update them, which now I understand, not entirely accurate. So there's the DMDB stats. Gosh, I can't even remember the DMV right now.
It's
DMDB stats properties. There we go. Which tracks modifications, right? That is my go-to. I just set this up in one of my long-term customer environments because their stats maintenance is just not cutting it anymore. Like I've been using Ola stuff. I've been going by percent modified, which uses that counter, and it's still taking too much time. So now I have to get to the point where this does tie back to your question, Anthony, where I'm trending really how frequently are stats being updated, either automatically, right, because that's still going to be enabled, or by the jobs, and how volatile are these statistics. And then I have to go back and also look at how many rows are in the table and figure out how long updates are taking, and do I have skew? So this becomes, right, not just a 10-minute drop in the plan to update stats. It's a multi-terabyte database where you have to get creative in how you're managing it. So I now look a lot more at modifications as a total of the table size, the row count, right, to understand whether stats are out of date.
I love that Ola's script started bringing some of that stuff in, because that only modified stats was that one.
I know, one row. It's like SB update stats, worthless. Sorry, no offense, Ola. Love everything.
But adding that in was that was a game changer for the stats update stuff. Yeah. The only thing I feel bad about is like how far along that came in, and like people who have just been running his scripts as is for years, and now like to get this one thing, I have to. Oh boy.
Actually, we had a customer that really needed it, and we went. Jonathan actually, I think, broke into that code and added it into Ola's code, and then emailed Ola and was like, hey, could you add this?
Pretty please.
So he put it on GitHub now. Is he taking pull requests against the code?
Oh, I have no idea.
Yeah, he'll take pull requests, but I think you have to be pretty careful with what you're adding in. If you do, you do something boneheaded, it's obvious.
So is that?
You really don't want to be the person who broke Hallen's maintenance scripts. Let's be honest.
It's not like his name's attached to it or anything, right?
Right. Yeah.
When did that come into his scripts roughly? Do you guys remember? Like last year, 2 years ago? Because
I wrote a
because we've
blog
all
post. Hang on.
we're all consultants.
Yeah.
Most of us are consultants or have been, and you go in the sites and you'll see that stuff, but you might think, well, maybe that's a script from 4 years ago, right? That doesn't include the
I'm gonna
functionality.
say,
2018, it looks
2018.
like.
Yeah. I was
Yeah,
gonna
that's
say a
when
couple years ago.
that's when I wrote about it.
Cool.
I don't know exactly, but I mean, it's been at least 2 years.
Yeah, that sounds about right to me.
Okay. So we're gonna pull a question from the stack then. So when working with a performance problem, right? This can go to either one, whoever wants to jump in first. What's your decision process on evaluating solutions, especially if you have like a query regression? Like, should you rewrite this thing, kick it back to the developers? Am I going to go and change a SQL Server setting? Or maybe it's I'm in the cloud and I have a giant bank account and I can just throw hardware at the problem. Like, can you kind of walk us through like, hey, my customer called, help me fix this thing that's, not doing well.
Erin, take it away.
Oh, there's so many variables
right.
there.
Yeah,
That's
so
trying to
hard.
think of like a recent issue and what my process was. I'll be honest in that throwing hardware, not really a fan. Here's an example. We had somebody reach out to us, and somebody that I knew and greatly respect in the SQL Server community. And the team reached out and said, we're having a really weird, bizarre problem. We'd like another set of eyes to look at it. And sometimes these are the most fun for us because we know we're going to see something atypical. And it was in the cloud, and they'd thrown hardware at it. They were on a 400 and change vCPU box with 5 terabytes of memory.
Was that one of the M2s, or was it Azure or AWS?
It was AWS. So yeah.
Okay. Oh, one of that big Xboxes then, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, I love
like
those things.
ginormous. And I was like, okay. And they were anticipating this additional load for one particular customer that they have. It's a multi-customer environment, right? They're hosting. And this customer, because they were going to have so much volume, there was a big push from up above, which was, we need bigger hardware, because normally they were running on a box, which was 96 vCores, I think, and like a terabyte of memory. And so, right, we're going to quadruple things and that'll be great. And sure enough, actually that box tipped over. Like drove CPU batch requests per second were half of what they were on the other box. And they're like, what's going on?
X.0.
and you know what? We did a quick review. They're like, you know what? Can we just review? And I'm like, I know you. I'm sure that you're fine with all your settings, but it's the trust but verify. So we rolled through, all the configuration options, TempDB, et cetera. There were a couple minor tweaks, but nothing where I would say, oh, this is your problem. This is what you need to change. And so then we did some data collection, and it was related to the size of the box. They ended up adding another instance to the availability group that was the 96 vCores, failed over to that, and ran the workload there and didn't have the problem.
Wild.
I know, right?
Wild.
Right. And it manifested as a really interesting spin lock back off, which and like just so odd. So the hardware was not the issue. And I don't like that as a first option until I can prove, right, that that's what I need to do.
Yeah, I had a similar circumstance.
Oh,
literally, 2 weeks ago, where it was there was an error in the code base, and it was a Cartesian product on 2 tables, and the management was like, "We're buying bigger servers," and this is in Azure, and I'm like, "Feel free, it's going to do absolutely nothing." And in your case, you described, it made it worse, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So.
Yeah, so I've definitely seen. No, it's not totally fine. It's almost impossible to get the timing right. These things.
Yeah.
But yeah, I've totally seen the same thing happen where so like sort of to Erin's point where like someone's like everything's going to crap. I don't know what to do. And as far as throwing hardware that goes, there are certainly some times where like that's kind of warranted. Like if I run into someone who's just running this like such severe resource contention, especially around like memory or disk, where adding more memory would just be a completely sensible thing to do. I've even had that backfire where like, you have queries asking for these gigantic memory grants and you're like, oh man, this sucks. And then like you add like double the RAM and all of a sudden the queries just ask for double the memory grant. And you're like, well, sorry.
Right.
My bad. I'm gonna resource governor this real quick, get that out of the way. But yeah, I've totally seen that. And I think, as far as like a process goes, it sort of depends on like where in the timeline you're coming in, right? Like if someone's like the server is slow now, there's stuff you can look at that's a lot different from stuff you could look at if someone's like it was slow last week, right? Like if it's slow right now, you can look for blocking, you can look for resource contention, you can do all sorts of stuff that might lead you to a different conclusion than if you looked at the server a week later. So it really does kind of depend on where you're parachuting into the problem. But, I think sort of generally, especially to the point where you mentioned about regressions, I mean, that's just, and like the thing that we're talking about, the very, like the thing that we were talking about during this call is like, index and stats maintenance, where, you rebuild stats or rather you rebuild an index and stats gets updated, or you update stats. And of course, as a byproduct, stats get updated. I hate to like, spoil it for anyone, but like that, the plan like changes because of that. SQL Server is like, oh, we need a different plan now. And you might have a regression because the new plan that SQL Server chooses is not quite as good as the old one. And that's a much weirder problem than parameter sniffing, where like one plan is bad for, one, set of parameters or whatever. And you're moving into the part where the new plan is just bad for everyone. Like, it's not like you've just lost a good plan. Like that's where like, the value of something like Query Store or if you have the luxury of a monitoring tool really comes in to help you.
So I have a kind of a general question about performance. How often when you walk onto a server, as you guys said, how often is it stats and indexes? Like how often is that the issue? Is it frequent, or is it usually a lot more complicated than that?
It's not frequent, but it's frequent enough that it's always something you check. Yeah. So, it depends on the week, it depends on the year. Almost like sometimes you just hit like multiple issues in a row, and then like you go like 6 months and then you run into another one.
Yeah, I would agree on that. I think when you're first looking at a server and you're trying to dig through like the layers and layers, because like no one, like hardly anyone is calling you about a database that's a year old or like even 5 years old. Most people are calling about databases that have been around forever and a day. And there's just like so many layers of stuff to dig through that by the time you get to like the fact that stats on one table are like 3 to 6 months out of date, you're just so exhausted by all the other stuff you've done that you're like, and also please just do something. Please just try this. Like I don't know if this is going to be the silver bullet, but like please just do something about this.
Yeah, it depends on how the problem presents, right? Is it overall system, right, performance that is slow? Or are you having problems with particular queries in general? So before we got on this call, actually, I had an email from a customer where they're having resource semaphore waits. And so I sent them the query, like, here, go check to see what memory grants you have currently, which ones we're waiting for. And the output that gets sent back is 3 queries, which are each requesting 3.7 gigs of memory for a memory grant. And then there's another one that's waiting. And I'm like, okay, there's where you're starting, right? These 3 versions of looks like the same query to me that are asking 3.7 gigs. Like you got to go look at the plan and figure out what's going on there, right? So that's a very different issue, right? And it presents in a way as overall slowness. But what we always try to teach people to do is go look at wait stats, go look at what's running right now, right? Who is active? Like that's just everywhere. And let me see what you're waiting on, and let me see what your wait sets are, and that's going to direct where we go.
Yeah, because I mean, there's a big difference between a query being slow because there's something wrong with the query, and a query being slow because of all the other stuff that's going on around it. And the idea of tuning a workload is, I mean, sort of so foreign to some people, where they're so heads down. It's just like, no, we have this one thing that's bad, we have this one metric that's bad, we have this one query that's bad, we have this one table we're really worried about, but they don't realize how like everything else sort of interacts and comes into play with that. And that's a great thing to teach people, if it's like not only to think outside of the like one thing that they perceive as being slow, but also like teach them how to fish with like the information they gather. And sometimes like it feels like you're being so hard on someone because like, they send you an email with like this sort of vague description of a problem, and you're like, okay, well, here's this stuff you need to do to send me for me to help you. And then like you get like half of it and you're like, no, I need all like you can't just send me a screenshot of like one part of SB who is active and be like, look at the CPU. And you're like,
are you looking at my email?
Yeah.
Did I share that
Right.
without meaning to? Like, seriously.
Yeah, that's always my favorite when working with a customer. You'd like put 3 questions in an email and they answer like 1. You're like,
and then give you something else entirely, right?
Yeah,
some
right.
other piece of info. It's pattern
PLE
matching.
is 4. What?
Yeah. Yeah. Pattern matching is part of it, which goes back to tuning the workload, right?
Yeah.
Like, what am I seeing consistently? Because depending upon your app and your developers, right? Usually they develop their own patterns and coding, which then manifest typically in a particular way when you're tuning and troubleshooting.
Yeah. And it's incredible how quickly the same few anti-patterns become like the coding culture within a company. Like, it doesn't matter if someone just walked in off the street and this is like their first developer job and they just start learning from the other code they see around them. They might bring bad habits in from another job. It's just, it comes from so many directions. You're just like how do I
no lock is
you?
used worse. This is where no lock is used once and then it gets applied absolutely everywhere. Because it made one thing go faster at one point.
Even updates and deletes, and you're like,
yeah,
maybe not.
who's seen the function that dynamically generates a where clause for the comma separated list, right?
Oh, that's fun. That's a good time. But hey,
Actually,
SQL
no,
Server 2019 fixes everything, right?
Oh, well, apart from CU7.
Unless you want to run CheckDB.
Right.
Oh,
No,
man.
Completely agree with both of you. It's you start off looking at what the problem with the server is. I was working in a company where update stats was always the fix, no matter what it was. They'd update stats, and when I say update stats, they'd update all the stats. And,
with a full scan, that's my other
yeah.
favorite.
Oh yeah.
Well, you never know
that
which
little
one
job
it's
that
gonna
just
be.
kicked off every 30 minutes. They kicked the job off. I said, "Oh, the server's still slow. Could you have a look at it, please?" And I went and had a look at it. It couldn't work. It took me a couple of minutes because it just wasn't responding. I thought, hang on, I'll kick Perfmon up and have a look what's going here. And then the IO latency to the SAN it was running off were 12 seconds. For an IO.
Seconds?
Seconds, not milliseconds. Seconds. Okay, so I don't think updating stats here is going to be the issue.
Might be that
have
1
some
gig
other
ice
issues.
SCSI.
Right. It's like someone's holding a magnet next to the sand, right?
Or Andrew's favorite answer to every performance problem is just to partition it, right?
Oh yeah. Oh, absolutely. We partitioned our tables and the performance got worse. That doesn't make any sense.
Well, I guess that we do have one question in our bucket of questions that kind of touches on that topic. So what's the decision process of between using sampled versus scan? Like, when you guys see a workload, you're like, you know what, I need the full scan this thing now. Like, how do you get to that decision point?
You have to look at the data. I mean, I say most of the time that the default sample's fine until it's not. And I mean, you can proactively do this, right, to try to understand skew. Kimberly has code to do that, but as Eric pointed out, people aren't paying attention to their indexes. They're not going to go pay attention to the data distribution in their columns and proactively manage that. So it's encountering inconsistent performance or multiple plans, right, that you're getting for a particular query or a set of queries that are accessing data, and then digging into that deeper and understanding kind of what that distribution looks like. Size of the table also, I think, and volatility. Like, I don't have a quick answer. There's also the volatility piece, right? Like, how much is that data changing and how often? And if it's small, I can probably get away with a full scan. If it's a hard hit busy table, as opposed to something that's ginormous.
Yeah, and it's so tricky too, because you can run into queries where cardinality estimates are off by a factor of 1,000, but they're still fine. Yeah. And you just don't see like the performance issue manifest in some of those queries. And it's what makes it so hard, is because like you want everything to be perfect so that if there is a problem, that you covered all the bases. But then you see stuff like that and you're just like, well, it guessed 1,000 rows, but there were 1,000,000 rows, but it still came up with a good enough plan, and everything had finished in like 500 milliseconds. So why am I going to bother with that? And Erin's absolutely right. People, if they're not paying that much attention to what their indexes actually are, they're not staring at histograms either.
Yeah, I have a customer right now, similarly, where the plan's good enough, but I do know that the workload's going to change because some business decisions that made. We're going to see additional workload, and so it's not. Sometimes it's not a technical thing in performance tuning. I know I got to deal with that plan at some time in the near future,
Yeah.
and get that from. I forget the exact values. Maybe it is 500 milliseconds down to as good as it's going to be because the workload's going to 10x, and so that I think part a lot. We get this you get disconnected from the data, but oftentimes we get disconnected from the business and understanding what's happening outside of the server.
I think that happens a lot.
Mhm.
Like, I feel like we're the last sometimes to know what's going on, right? Like there's this
Yeah.
problem and things are on fire and we have to fix it. And nobody on the other side has said, oh, we did this. We didn't tell you. Sorry.
Yeah. Like very important customer A just kicked off a 5 billion row
Right.
import. And you're like,
Right.
oh, no big deal.
Right. I should
Don't
plan
tell
for
me
that.
anything.
Why aren't you monitoring?
Yeah, let me just update stats. We'll get right back on track.
So we might have mentioned a few of these already, but what kind of myths and misconceptions are out there about, say, statistics and indexing, and how that can affect, say, how people implement or work out a plan in their database to implement indexing, things like that?
Well, by indexing, do you mean like creating indexes, or do you mean the maintenance end of it?
Oh, let's go both. Why not both?
Okay. All right. Well, yeah. Well, I mean, chiefly, I think the main thing that drives maintenance misconceptions is Microsoft's published advice of thresholds for 5%, 30%, and 1,000 pages.
That
If you
may or
think
may
about-
not be the first question
That's
in
my
our column
boss.
here.
That's my boss who did that.
And you know what? When he said it, I don't blame him. If you think
Well,
about the storage hardware and like the size of data at that time, those numbers made total sense.
But you also know, right, that those are just
Yeah.
made up numbers.
Yeah. Just
I'm
just
sorry
throw your
to
hands up.
disappoint anybody. Like it was like, this is good. This one's good. We're going to go with that. So, I mean, I say that whenever I talk about index maintenance, right?
Yeah.
Paul made these up. You're going to probably want to change them.
Yeah, fictional numbers, but they have just spread throughout every single
Sure.
maintenance script that I see has those defaults in it. I think that is probably the biggest one where like, especially for that number of pages, like sure, that stuff totally made sense if you were on old spinny wiki type storage where like physical IO meant jumping around and doing stuff, but oof, these days, I like those numbers are just those numbers are very weird. And the fragmentation that all the scripts measure to me is off base. I would much rather measure physical fragmentation, the empty space on pages, than pages being slightly out of order. I just feel like, with SSDs or RAM, which is random access by name anyway, the slightly out of order bit is a little bit less important than the page fullness, because you're just wasting so much space in the buffer pool, especially if you're on, standard edition or even an enterprise edition box, it's a bit constrained for memory for whatever reason. And you have to tangle with that. And, it can be very, very difficult to figure out like, well, SQL Server is using all the memory and like everything is still terrible and I'm still reading stuff from disk a lot. And like, I'm just sort of like have this Ouroboros of data in and out of the buffer pool. Why is that? And like, if your index maintenance scripts were measuring page fullness and you were able to see, how much wasted space you had, I think it might change a lot of people's perspective about, like how all those different parts of the SQL Server work together.
So I love that you brought that up because, you had sent some notes over before. And one of the things that you mentioned was that you didn't like the way that they measure, right?
Yes.
And I absolutely agree with that. I'll be honest in that I never kind of like thought through that before. So when you said that, I was like, well, now that's a really interesting point. And I would completely agree with you about the page density, right? How much data is on that page and how much
Sure.
space are we potentially wasting on disk and in memory? I know that theoretically they're both cheap, but it matters, right? It still matters. So my question back to you, because now I'm going to be difficult, is why,
yes, please.
When you say don't do maintenance, what you're really saying is I want you to do your index maintenance differently, right?
Yes.
That's really what you're saying.
Yes.
So have you written about that?
I have, yeah. I think in one of at least one of the threads where we've talked about it on Twitter, I linked over to a post that I wrote about how index maintenance scripts are measuring the wrong thing. And I've probably smattered about other blog posts. I've written about how the defaults for a lot of these scripts are off, and how you should not rely on index rebuilds to fix all of your performance problems. I've talked to people who are just so dead set on index fragmentation being this bizarre root cause to every single problem. It's like, we have a locking problem because of fragmentation. We have a deadlock problem because of fragmentation. Just like one thing after another that you get these sort of like L1 support answers about. It's just like, well, your index is fragmented, and you're like, that has nothing to do with this problem. Please stop asking.
Yeah. I think because that gets thrown out so much, right, to people in the beginning of these are the things that you need to do, and they just grab onto those, right? Like this is what I have to do, and I'm doing it, right? Or I'm not doing it. That must be my problem, right? So it's a complete miss in understanding what's truly important. But I think then there has to be, I mean, I don't know. I like this idea of like this grassroots change of like, okay, so how can we help people understand how to do this better, right? How to do this differently.
Sure.
And it's a group effort, right?
Yes.
Because you can write a post and I can write a post, but that's not enough.
No.
But we'd have to change it. My challenge is that in order to understand density, then we have to do detailed, right? Which
you can do limited.
Will limited give it to you?
Yeah, that'll give it to you.
But limited is only going to give it then on the it's not going to give it on the leaf level, right?
So like when I've done it, when I've done experiments with it, I have not found a significant difference in the page density returned between limited and detailed. I won't pretend that that's exhaustive and that it covers every single scenario and circumstance, but you certainly get it back for limited. And for me, it's always been close enough to detailed that I would be okay measuring that rather than the page out of order metric. So and then like if there's a way to get that is not tough on us, because believe you me, I've had I'm sure you've hit it big databases even with sample that commands take an hour to run, and you're like, what am I doing here?
So then what's your threshold? Because people are going to want a number, right? Just like the 5 and 30, right? There has to be, and this is also where the challenge comes in, right? Is that if you want people to do it better, and we want them ideally to do it what we think is right, you have to give them a map. But there's no straight map.
No.
Right? It's the choose your own adventure game.
Yeah, you would have to like draw a query plan of options for them to follow, and like they would like the decision logic on that would be just it'd be too crazy to like even explain. Like I feel like charting that out would be very, very difficult. There's not a good way to simplify that tree into.
But here's the thing: if you don't do that, then we never address the issue.
No, we don't.
Then we never get away from this, right? So you have to choose to either try.
Yes.
Or just be like, I'm just going to complain about it.
And so like stuff that I've tried to do is I've tried to bring that up to people who write the scripts. To offer that as like an option. To fall back on that. Or to use that rather than the page out of order thing. I've leaned on Microsoft a few times to try to get them to change the documentation around 5 and 30 and 1,000 pages, and that hasn't been very fruitful. So like I do try to get things to change, but I also feel like I am fighting a very uphill battle with very limited time, and I kind of have to pick which hills I'm gonna run up with my sword out. So as much as I would love for this to change. I feel like if I can start addressing it with people in the community, having talks like this, maybe doing presentations on it, maybe blogging about it, writing about it, maybe I can I can start pushing some dominoes over there. And then if I can kind of start to do the same thing with my clients and have them start to do things in a slightly better way, maybe someone sees that at one job, takes it to another job, it moves on from there. I don't think it's going to be a mass change overnight. I don't think there's going to be an index maintenance revolution where people are just like, toppling,
that idea,
toppling statues of 5%.
I was going to say that needs a t-shirt.
No, you know what? I totally get it, Eric. And I think that, but I guess everybody picks their hill, right?
Yes.
I picked extended events, right? I'm still climbing. And that's fine because I still think it's important.
I agree with you on that.
And the same I think could be said for the maintenance. And my additional thing that I would say is maybe important as I would say we try to make this change is getting the data, right? So when we do implement for customers, oh, hey, this is how we're going to handle index maintenance instead. What can we capture that we can then take back and say, listen, like, it's not just that we think this is a good idea. Like we've done the work, right?
Yep.
But you're right. It is a slow change, but witness the discussion that we had end of last year about query plans and runtime stats and estimated versus actual.
Oh, right. I know. And like fighting the legacy battles is so difficult. And like, it's so hard to come up with a better way to say things than you currently have.
I have to write that down. Fighting the legacy battles. That's what has to be on the back of the shirt.
If we're making notes, I just want to make a note that I'm never saying it depends to a question ever again. I'm going to say choose your own adventure.
Yes.
Well, I mean, you can monetize this, right? You can go to management and say, well, you bought 4 terabytes of memory for your server and you're running enterprise and you're wasting 30% of your pages on air, right? And that can be a real thing to people when you quantify it with the actual dollar amount.
And you don't even have to go that big. I think it's more important for people who are on the smaller amounts of memory, like poor standard edition with that 128 gig memory pool. Like,
taking out every dollar there.
Yeah, right. If you're wasting space in there, man, someone better be on your case about it.
Yeah, I would agree. So who's ordering the shirts?
I don't know. We're gonna have to start a Slack channel to argue about design choices.
Oh my gosh! Don't make me get on Slack, please.
Don't worry. No. I don't even have it installed anymore.
Oh yeah,
I think I do,
Andrew
but I
should
don't
show
know
his amount of Slack channels he's on. If he's on like
I know
15
I've signed.
or 20.
I'm signed out a lot of them now.
Erin, don't worry. We'll do it on SharePoint.
It just got crazy. They just kept coming.
Now I know you're kidding.
We can afford it.
All
right.
So let's talk about the cloud, because the database conversation these days
Never
can't
heard
go
of
30 minutes without talking about the cloud. So is the way you come to approach performance tuning any different in, say like an Azure offering like Azure SQL DB? Because I'm not very experienced with it, but they do have things like, automatic index creation and automatic stats creation. So that affects how you would approach a problem, say, with performance tuning in the cloud versus on-prem. And do you think those features are going to come into the on-premise version of SQL Server?
I don't see. So like the reason why they can afford to do that in the cloud is because Microsoft owns all those cycles. So they can afford to do some behind the scenes stuff and look at what can change and what shouldn't and all that. I have a hard time picturing your average SQL Server consumer being okay with doing that, especially if it's an opt-out process rather than an opt-in process, as some things have turned out to be. But it doesn't really scare me all that much. To be very honest, the indexes that I've seen it come up with are not a heck of a lot better than the missing index recommendations. I know that there's supposedly some extra magic behind them, but I just haven't seen them do that much better yet. That being said, for the people who we talk to, I think, on a daily, weekly, monthly, whatever basis, who are doing no index tuning on their own, it's a hell of a lot better than nothing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's really geared for the company that stands up 500 databases in Azure and doesn't really have a DBA, or it has one, and that DBA is not going to be able to, manage all 500 well. So what can they give those folks to try to manage performance? I don't see them pulling the index auto create and auto drop. Actually, you can selectively turn those on and off. I don't see them pulling that to the on-prem version anytime soon.
Yeah, I think that's especially a tough sell to ISVs who have a set of indexes that they really care about, and they don't want you messing with anything. And if all of a sudden you're going out there and just like, here's this new feature, and they're like, it's like,
they're the ones that are still going 50 and 30 when you call support, right? And making you run index tuning every day or something like that. Everything's rebuilt every day.
Yep, exactly.
We've all lived that one.
I used to work for an ISV, so I've seen both sides of that story.
Yes.
Um,
Well, yes, there's definitely good ones that put the thought into it, but there's also the ones as consultants that we have to go and,
No, I
and
agree.
clean up after.
I completely
So-
agree. I completely agree. In terms of tuning, I don't know that I really approach it that much differently. I mean, there's some things you have to do differently in the cloud, but it's still the same premise, right? In that
Yep.
I'm gonna go look to see what are we waiting on, what queries are having problems, and work from there. I just am a little bit more constrained in what's underneath. Like
Yep.
I'm a control person. I'll be really honest with you.
Same.
So when I can't like get to the box and like I can't get more information about the box and what else is there and what else are we
Yep.
playing with, I'm a little bit frustrated, but it's just a mentality shift.
Well, I think tooling there is a challenge because a lot of the tooling that we're used to using is either different, surfacing the answer a little bit differently, or not deep enough, right? If we
Yeah.
want to crack open Perfmon, that ain't a thing if you're
Right.
using a managed data. Right?
And I love Perfmon still.
Yeah, performance tuning. People will call it a lot of things, but it really is a set of fundamentals, and those fundamentals don't really change all that much, regardless of where the performance problem is. Sure, there might be different things that you have to go look at, that you have to go do. There might be some things that you don't have access to, but having a solid grasp on the fundamentals of what you need to look at, when you need to look at it, information you need to gather, knowing where to find different things, that just doesn't change. It doesn't matter where you're doing it. It's the same set of things. It really does just come down to a specific, like having a process and following that process and adapting that process to whatever changes you might come across.
So kind of on the same vein of the things that were brought up about auto, index creation and stuff. What are your thoughts, both of you, on auto update stats? Specifically, if you get on a server and see that it's been disabled, like what do you think about that feature, and if it should ever be disabled?
That sounds like a loaded question, Mark. Have you been turning off everywhere?
It's a fair question, I think.
Yeah.
To me, it's a safety. So if it's disabled, I'm going to ask why. There might be valid reasons for it. Actually, the software company that I used to work at, we actually in a documentation for a very long time recommended disabling it, told people they should disable it, because when that application was first developed, it was SQL Server 7.0, SQL Server 2000 days. And it had some, for that time, decent sized tables on not so great hardware, right? Back in 2000, 2001, right? And these tables would 20% of the data would change and an auto update would kick off in the middle of the day and they would see a performance issue. So the decision was made of, we're not going to enable auto update stats. So I come along and I'm like, hang on. Everybody says this should be enabled. Wait a second. And so it goes into understanding why it's like what it does and why, right? So if it's not enabled, I want to understand it. To me, it's a safety net. I want to proactively manage stats with a job or multiple jobs. Again, depends entirely on that environment, how big that database is, how busy it is, what the workload looks like. But auto updates there just in case, to me.
Yeah, totally. And I like it a lot better, I think, now than I did prior to SQL Server 2016 when the trace flag 2371 became the default. Yeah. So, I mean, I like it a lot better now because the old one just didn't make any sense for really big tables. And it was maybe a little too aggressive for smaller tables. But, I'm totally on board with Erin. Some decisions were made historically for good reasons, and some decisions were made historically for good reasons that don't exist anymore, and some decisions were made just because someone did something by accident. And getting to the root of that and figuring out if that's still the best decision for the the environment as a whole is just part of the consulting process.
So we were talking about the cloud. We touched a little bit on tooling, right? And so I guess and I guess this doesn't have to be like a vendor thing, but what are your go-to tools today that you're using to troubleshoot custom stuff, off the shelf stuff? I know Query Store is going to be one of these answers, but what are you guys using today to help troubleshoot workloads?
Erin probably has a much cooler answer to this than I do.
No, go ahead.
I mean, I don't know. Where I come from, I love using the Blitz stuff. It's those scripts that I contribute to. They are scripts that I know how they work and I understand them. So I have a pretty good good time being able to use them. And then, as far as stuff outside of that, other scripts, I've written a couple, pressure detector, which helps you when, thread pool and resource semaphore and stuff kick off. And I wrote SP human events to make troubleshooting with human events a little bit easier. So I generally use those. And then as far as monitoring tools, I'm usually very happy if someone has Sentry One installed. I don't know if it's the best monitoring tool out there, but it's the one that I seem to have the best luck with when I'm working with it.
Yeah. So you don't ever know if somebody's going to have a monitoring tool, right?
No. You always pray though.
Right. You
Right.
hope, but you never know, right? Do we have any data at all?
Yeah.
So I tend to start with who is active, and I start with Paul has a snapshot for wait stats, right? So I want to know what they are right now, assuming I'm jumping into the problem, right? If it's past tense, then that's a whole different story. But if the problem's happening and I'm coming in there, then I want to snapshot and I'm running who is active. And then based on what I'm seeing there, it kind of determines where I'm going next. So the third-party tools are great. I mean, we have a partnership with Sentry One, so I definitely have a bias there, and we have a lot of customers that use it. But I was actually working with a customer the other day who had SolarWinds. And one of the things that SolarWinds does that I really like is the way they do their wait stats. So I know that there's 900 and some, and we're not going to know all of them. Like, I don't want to know all of them, frankly, but you know the ones that right?
Yes. You know the ones that you care about.
Right, exactly. And so what happens sometimes in a third-party tool is they kind of roll them up. And Microsoft does this as well. They do it in Query Store, right? They go with the grouped weight types as opposed to the individual weight sets, because keeping all that would be ridiculous. But I want to know what they are. I want to know what the individual weights are, which is why I pull the script. But in SolarWinds, it actually does break that. It's not grouping them all together. So there's a lot of colors on the graph. But when one of them stands out, it was a lot easier to see. And this is just a visual thing. I think rather than, so much there's just like this big bar that's moving or whatever. I don't know what the right visual term is for that. I'm not a visualization person.
The thing with the lumps.
The thing with the lumps, right? And it's multicolored. Like they had it like per hour, right? So it was time sliced. And that really visually was very appealing to me. So.
Yeah, like every monitoring tool certainly has its strong points and its differences and presents data differently.
Yeah.
Like just for me, the only reason I say this because I just have, I think the most experience production wise with Sentry One, and just when I crack it open, I'm like that familiarity is so nice, and like not like having to learn like 7 different ways to reinvent the troubleshooting wheel is just a nice plus for me.
It's the fork,
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I mean, like you said it earlier, as a consultant, just having the data. Do you have something? Right. So, all right. So, last question, and it's kind of open-ended. So, for both of you again, if you could have one feature in SQL Server implemented tomorrow, what's that feature, and how would it help?
I have my answer.
Go.
I would like to see better. I guess it would fall under intelligent query processing stuff for parameter sniffing. I think that is such a huge, difficult problem that people try to solve in all sorts of ways that feel like they have a real misunderstanding of the problem. And I would love to see with all of, with the support that Microsoft has put into Query Store, to the tooling that they've, or like the metric collection, because, you know, Azure's robots need to get stuff and it trickles out to us, and which is very nice. But like, you know, whatever stuff they need to put in there for them to monitor, it comes out to us, which is nice. But you know, I think that, you know, with all the intelligent query processing stuff, with the automatic index tuning, with the regression tuning, with all this stuff that they're putting into it, I think that you know, a little bit more headway into not being so stuck on the parameter sniffing thing would be really nice, you know, especially with Query Store. And like even beyond that, just like, you know, with the amount of stuff that we're storing, it in like the size that servers are getting to these days, it seems far more trivial to maybe have a little bit more to the plan cache, or maybe just do away with the plan cache and have it all move to Query Store. That, you know, like you could do a lot more with that data in order to avoid the most basic parameter sniffing issues of like, there are 10 million of this value and 1,000 of every other value. What are we going to do? I don't know. Do 1,000 plan for everyone. It's just like, come on, man. You know, you can do a little bit, like with all the compute cycles you have in there, like all the knowledge you have in there, all the engineering you have in there, you can do a little bit better than that.
That is a good one. I agree. And on the Query Store piece, the having the Query Store on the secondaries, I mean, that gets asked for every time I talk about it. That comes up. I mean, that user voice item has like over 400 votes. So I don't, that's not something I think they can ignore. My other two, which I don't know if it's really put in the product, can we just take away profiler? Like,
yes, thank you.
So your feature request is the removing of a feature.
But I know why they can't and why it's not going to go away for a while. But I sent something in an email the other day that said, "Do you think it will be gone before I retire?" I'd like to know. It depends. And my other big thing would just be not necessarily. I think that this is already there. It's getting people to understand it. Is that Query Store is a feature that everybody can use. You all know that's one of my favorite things. But in 2019, where it stands now with the different options and with the fix, there's a fix they introduced in, I think it's 2017, related to how much memory Query Store is allowed to use. That's limited now. Like, I don't know if that's in the CU7 that got pulled or if it's coming, but if it's in 2017, I know it's going to be in 2019, right? Which really makes it a much more viable option for even those with the ridiculous ad hoc workloads.
Yeah, and you know, I always point people to your blog posts about best practices for the setup on that, but I really do think that Microsoft's shift to the intelligent setup of things is really, really, like, that's really, really strong for them. Like the stuff, like even when you install SQL Server, going through the stuff that people just, you know, everything was a post install script. But now having, when you turn on Query Store, the settings that you get out of the box, like even just having like the auto collection mode is so much better than just dump everything in.
And size better than 100 megs, right?
You know,
come on.
little things, right?
Yeah, it's interesting sometimes how much telemetry that's there, right? That they use for making these decisions about the application that doesn't propagate to the decision to the users, right? Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah,
like
totally.
it's used in the code, but not in how we're helping out the users with implementation.
Right.
Cool. Well, I want to thank you both for joining us for episode 2 of Mixed Extents. Erin Stellato, Erik Darling, thank you so much. Anthony Innocentino and my co-hosts Andrew Prusky
Thank you,
and
folks,
Mark
very much.
Wilkinson. Thanks everybody for watching.
Thank you.